Okay, here we are at section 20, the installation of the fuel system. We'll start off with the installation of the tanks, and then we'll install the components to the fuel rail, the fuel pumps, the shutoff valve, and the fuel filter. Now your rotaway engine is a fuel injected engine, so that requires high pressure fuel delivery. All your hoses are steel braided, and in your kit you also get hose jackets. Every steel braided hose needs to be covered with a jacket. Now we're at section 20, so I know you're excited. We're getting near the end, so let's get started.
Refer to the Construction Manual, Section 20, for components and prints. Use the supplied Teflon tape on all fittings with pipe threads, NPT, in this assembly. Pipe threads are tapered so that they seal across the threads. Do not use Teflon tape on the other fittings, such as the AN aluminum hose ends. These types of fittings have a machine chamfer which creates a positive seal. Unlike pipe threads, these will not seal better by being tightened more, and can be damaged by over-tightening. The A600 Talon is equipped with Rotaway's unique VADEC electronic engine control system and fuel injection. In this system, gasoline is delivered to the injectors at a very high pressure of 54 psi. Because of this, only the best quality hoses and fittings are used. When installing the fuel system components, be aware of the following. Before installing the fuel hoses, flush them thoroughly with solvent and blow them dry with compressed air. Do this after installing the hose jackets. Carefully inspect the insides of the hoses for any dirt or debris. Apply a light film of engine oil to the threads and chamfers of the fittings. The braided steel hoses should be routed so that they curve smoothly without being kinked or sharply bent. The steel braiding on the hoses is extremely abrasive. Once the engine is running, vibrations will cause the braid to wear through whatever it comes in contact with, just like a file. Because of this, Rotaway has included hose jacket and tape for the number 6 hose and the number 8 hose. Install the hose jacket and tape the ends as shown. Note: most hoses can be identified by the combination of their hose ends. However, after installing the hose jackets, you can apply a piece of masking tape with the hose part number for positive identification later. Part numbers are located on the steel tag on each hose. You can also install the jacket just long enough to keep the metal tag visible, as shown here. The aluminum hose ends and fittings can be damaged if over-tightened. To get the correct amount of leverage, you can purchase AN wrenches that are designed for these type of fittings. Otherwise, place your close to the end of the wrench to avoid over-tightening. Do not turn on the fuel pumps or add fuel to the system until the helicopter is ready for the first startup. Before adding any fuel to the system, double-check the tightness and security of all fittings. When fuel is pumped through the hoses for the first time, wear eye protection and have a fire extinguisher nearby. The pressure of this system can cause fuel to be sprayed surprisingly far and fast. The two fuel tanks drain simultaneously so that the lateral center of gravity of the helicopter is not affected. The tanks are made from a cross-linked polyethylene plastic material noted for its durability. A similar fuel tank made from aluminum would be 10 to 15% lighter. However, there would be no comparison in strength. Be sure to check for leakage, especially around the fittings and seams upon final installation of the tanks. Important: before operation, be sure that the heat shielding material has been taped to the fuel tanks and that the shields on the exhaust manifolds have been properly installed. This is the pilot side fuel tank and fuel gauge sender as received from Rotorway. Inspect the fuel filler opening and deburr if necessary. Be careful not to gouge the fuel tank wall directly below the filler cap holes. Check orientation of the gasket. Note: the mounting holes are not symmetrical, so make sure you position the sender so the wires are exiting the sender unit as shown. Be careful not to damage the gasket when marking the hole locations. Use the fuel gauge sender cork gasket as a template to locate the openings for the sender probe. Cut the hole for the sender opening with a hole saw. Use caution not to cut into the inside wall of the tank. Builder tip: the hole alignment for the sending unit is critical. Use the sending unit as a drill block and carefully mark a center point with a number 5 drill bit. Just make a center point. Do not drill too far into the material. Do only one hole at this time. The bolt threads are 1032. Drill the holes with a number 23 drill and tap the holes with 1032 tap. Place the sender unit in position and bolt in place with your tapped hole. Do not over-tighten these bolts as it will strip out the threads. Now locate the center point for the rest of the holes. Drill with a number 23 and tap the rest of the holes. Before installing any fittings or the sending unit, flush both tanks thoroughly with water to remove the plastic chips and debris. Be sure the tanks are completely dry before any assembly. Use an air hose. The fuel tank strainers as received from Rotorway. Drill a 3/16" hole in the top of each strainer. Use caution when handling so as not to damage the threads. Use a vacuum to pull a string down through the filler cap to the tank drain opening. First, install the aluminum washer by allowing it to slide down the string while holding the string at the bottom. Next, do the same with the fitting. From below, install the rubber O-ring and the other aluminum washer. Secure with an AN nut. Use a thin 5/8" wrench to hold the fitting while tightening. Keep fitting protected until installation. Install the return hose barb fittings in both tanks near the filler cap holes. Use Teflon tape on the threads. Install the fuel gauge sender. Place the gasket on the sender unit. Align the holes and apply a gasket maker sealer such as Permatex on both sides of the gasket. Put a small amount of sealant in the mounting holes and insert the mounting screws. Place the sending unit in the tank. Safety wire the 5 bolts as shown. You will need 20 thousandths safety wire for these bolts. Note, it will be necessary to grind away clearance for the lower fitting and hose so that it will not rub against the bracket as shown. Glue rubber strips on the airframe where the tank will set against. Install the foam heat shielding on the tanks. Note: the pilot side tank has an offset formed in it to fit tight against the airframe. Fit the heat shield so that it will not interfere with this offset. Clean the surface with acetone before fitting the shield. Trim the shield as necessary. The heat shield has an adhesive backing, but that alone will not adhere to the tank surface. Use 3M weather strip adhesive along the edges to ensure it will hold in position. Do all the way around on all edges. The tanks can be held in position with ratchet straps or safety wire until they are ready to be permanently mounted. You may also need to shim the tank up for its proper height. Wood block bolted to the lower tank bracket works best for this. Allow 1/2 inch minimum clearance between the seatback panel and the fuel tank. The desired height of the top edge of the fuel tank filler nipple is about 1/2 inch to 5/8 of an inch below the fiberglass cowling. Position the rear of the fuel tank so it just clears the top of the airframe tube as shown. These are the retention straps as received from Rotorway. Use the short piece E25-3110 to make one of the rear straps. Fabricate the retention straps to hold the fuel tanks. Reference construction print E25-2000. Use a socket that matches the diameter of the airframe tubing as a die to make your loop clamps. Use the rear portion of the tank to help shape the rear bracket as shown. Keep in mind as you fabricate the rear tank brackets that the tank must be secured very close to the airframe. The rear upper fuselage panels must not contact the fuel tanks. As you bend and form the straps, allow 1/8 of an inch clearance for the thickness of the rubber strips. Glue the rubber strips to the retention straps with weather strip adhesive. This shows the passenger tank strapped in position. This shows the upper strap secured to the airframe. Place a piece of rubber between the tank and the bracket. This shows the lower bracket and tank strap. Fuel shutoff and mount hardware. Note: when installing the fuel shutoff, be sure the aluminum spacers do not clamp down on the small snap ring when tightening the bolts. Mount the fuel shutoff valve filter assembly on the passenger side of the fuel tube mount, using the socket head cap screws, aluminum spacers, and hose clamp. The cable will be installed later, reference section 22. Fuel pumps as received from Rotorway. Install the hose clamps on the fuel tube bracket. Mount the pumps with the negative black electrical terminals facing each other. Make sure the ribs on the pumps are above the hose clamps as shown. Note: keep the openings plugged until the hoses are installed to help keep dirt out. Fuel filter and fittings. Install the fuel filter fittings with the crush washers. Glue the rubber pad to the fuel tube bracket. Secure the filter with the hose clamps. Pressure regulator and fittings. Mount the fuel pressure regulator to the bracket with the large nut and lock washer. Do not tighten the nut until after the hoses are fitted. This will allow the regulator to pivot on the bracket slightly for a better fit. Install the fuel pressure gauge sensor on the top fitting of the regulator. Note: when installing the fuel hoses, the hose ends can be turned slightly for better alignment. Hold the fitting with a wrench as shown and turn the end. Use a small amount of motor oil on the surface of the mating fittings and hose ends. The fuel hoses should be tightened by hand only until all components of the fuel system have been installed. Then, when the hose routing is satisfactory, tighten the fittings with the wrenches. Remember to grip the wrench close to the fittings or use Allen wrenches to help prevent over-tightening. Reference construction print E25-2001 for the installation of the fittings and all hoses. To install the inlet hoses for the pumps, slide the hose clamp over the hose end. Remove the protective tape from the end of the hose. Any frayed wires from the braiding can be trimmed with scissors or wire cutters if necessary. Apply a light film of engine oil to the inside of the hose and the inlets on the pump for easier installation. Caution: handle carefully, the steel braid wires are sharp. Carefully slide the hose over the inlet and tighten the hose clamp. Make sure the hose is pushed all the way up to the pump before tightening the clamp. Route the pump inlet hoses per the print to the fuel shutoff valve. Install the two E25-4270 adapters to the fuel pumps. Then install the hoses E25-4061 pump filter and E25-4071 pump filter from the outlet of the pumps to the filter. Route the hose assembly E25-4080 from the filter to the fuel rail on the engine pilot side. Route the hose assembly E25-4110 from the fuel rail on the engine passenger side to the bottom fitting of the fuel pressure regulator. Install the rubber hose E25-4130 from the right side of the regulator to the fitting on the plenum. Secure the hose with plastic hose clamps. Install the hose assembly E25-4121 from the left side of the regulator to the return fitting located behind the seat back. When all components of the fuel system have been installed and when the hose routing is satisfactory, tighten the fittings with wrenches. Remember to grip the wrench close to the fittings to help prevent over-tightening. Remember to secure the fuel pressure regulator nut. Using template E25-1, make the fuel drain cock mounting bracket. Screw the fittings and drain cock into the T using Teflon tape on the threads. Mount the assembled drain cock on the bracket with the nut plates and cushion loop clamps as shown. Install E25-4020 from the fuel shutoff valve to the passenger fuel tank. Route the hose assembly E25-4030 from the crossover T to the drain as shown. Install E25-4011 hose from the pilot tank to the fuel drain T. Pass hose through the airframe hole as shown. Fuel drain and bracket viewed from rear. You will be instructed later to secure the bracket to the tub in this location with screws and nut plates. Assemble the T fitting with the 45-degree and hose barbs as shown. Determine the best position to mount the T fitting on the back of the seat back. This should be off-center towards the passenger side. Make sure the hose is clear of any moving parts and secured to the airframe. Use cushion loop clamps as necessary. The T must not be higher than the top of the fuel tanks at any point.